Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor presented by Profotech Solutions team. I am Sanjay. We are learning CodeIgniter Framework for Beginners tutorial and this is our part 2. Inside this video session guys, we will discuss about application architecture and the folder structure. And also guys, if you're a beginner to this channel, please don't forget to subscribe and keep watching our other playlist and the previous video sessions to get the clear concept about CodeIgniter Framework tutorial. In our previous part guys, part number 1, we have downloaded the CodeIgniter Framework version 3.1.10 from this official website called CodeIgniter.com. And finally, we have made our GitHub repository where actually we have committed our first commit about the initial setup to the GitHub repository. And the first part we have made under the playlist called Learn CodeIgniter Framework Beginners Tutorial. You can find about the first video inside this playlist. So if we back to folder structure, now this is the folder that we have downloaded. So inside this folder, we have basically three major folders of CodeIgniter Framework and something called application, system and user guide. Fourth one is the GitHub repository actually folder has been created. So it is not part of the application. So just forget about this folder. So what basically application, system and user guide? So one more most important thing is guys, application folder is the most important part of the overall CodeIgniter application because this folder structure contains all the major functionalities called modal, view and the controller architecture. So if we go back, now application contains our application, means our project. System contains our core files. Basically by the help of those core files of CodeIgniter we can actually build our application. Suppose we are going to use the predefined features of CodeIgniter, all the predefined libraries, helpers and the many more things of CodeIgniter are all the core files stored inside this system folder. User guide is the user manual. It means that if you go inside this folder, if I click on index.html, now this is the actually user manual or user guide what we have seen inside this official website. If I click on the documentation, scroll here, if I click on the read the user manual online, as we can see that the same guideline the CodeIgniter basically provides offline mode and all the guide is stored inside this user guide folder. Suppose if you want to use or if you want to learn about the concept of views, let's say that if I scroll down, that inside here are views as a link and models and helpers. So any of the topic, if you want to get the information about those, if I click on that link, it will be redirected on the same folder structure as we can see that, and this is the HTML file. So user guide basically provides the user manual of the CodeIgniter documentation. So back to our project setup. Now system. Basically what we have discussed, that system contains about the core files, about the predefined libraries and helpers that the CodeIgniter basically provides. Back to learn CI. Now this is our project setup called application. Application contains multiple folders. What basically these multiple folders do? Cache. As we know that the cache is a memory type where basically all the information is stored which is repeated over the loading of website. Suppose we have made a project. In that project we are going to load our, let's say that a slider in the pages called home, about, services and contact us. All the pages basically contains a slider at the top header. So all the repeated things is stored basically inside this cache. So what basically uses that it increases the speed or the load time of the pages so that the repeated content not loads every time on the page load. Now next we have called config folder. This is also important folder inside this application. If I go inside this config, this is our configuration folder. Suppose if you want to configure our routes, if you want to configure our database and many more things, all the configuration goes inside this config folder. As we can see that auto load, if suppose we have made our custom libraries, custom helpers, if you want to load any defined libraries, then we can use this autoload.php file. If we want to setting our database connections, if we want to go and use a database table, so all those connections goes inside this file called database.php. We will do in our upcoming videos. Now next, all the files are necessary inside this config folder. One more file we are going to discuss about this is called routes.php. This is also an important file. Basically this file controls all about the URL routing through this file. If we want to control over routes, over the parameterized route, so all the things go inside this file. Back to application folder. Next we have the controllers. Controllers is the main part which basically connects our views files and the model files. So inside this folder we basically make our controller. We will make the application controllers in our upcoming videos. So back to application folder. Inside this core, inside this folder we will store all those classes which basically uses as the base controller for our application. Suppose we have made an application and we also made another class which basically by inheriting those classes we are going to extend our features, we are going to enhance our features. So all those features inside the class, and that class basically we will store inside this core folder. Now helpers. Suppose as we know that the CodeIgniter Frameworks provides multiple helpers. If you go to user guide, if I type about the helpers, click on these. So helpers provide all the helper functions inside the CodeIgniter. It is also the predefined libraries. But in case suppose we want to make our own custom helper, so how can we store those helpers? So by making our custom helpers, we are going to store all those helpers inside this helpers directory, helpers folder structure. If you go to our documentation, back to user guide, and if I scroll here, as we can see that this is our helper reference. So these all helpers basically provides as the default features of CodeIgniter. But apart from these, if we want to define our custom, then in that condition we need to define inside this helpers folder. What basically hooks folder is? Hooks are the predefined libraries changing moments. Suppose we have some predefined libraries, we have some predefined helpers. We want to change the way of flow of those libraries and helpers. We want to change the functionalities of those without changing any of the core functionality. So obviously we can alter those features without any overwriting features on those, or without changing the code of code. We can just put our code inside this hooks folder, so that by putting all those codes we can change the flow of those predefined libraries. Now next we have language folder. Basically suppose we have made an application and that application is in English language. So we want to make those applications in different languages, suppose French, suppose Spanish, Chinese. So how can we control over the languages? So all the languages file go inside this language folder. So if I press enter, inside this folder right now we have English folder. In suppose we are going to make a website in Spanish, so in that condition we will make a folder called Spanish here and store our language file inside that folder. We will make use of all those folders inside our upcoming videos. Now next we have libraries folder. Also the same what we have discussed about the helpers, we also have the predefined libraries as we can see here. So if we want to use apart from these libraries, so we will store our custom libraries inside this folder. Now next we have logs folder. As we know that the word logs clears itself that if we make an application and the application is running, then it makes a logs for that. All the logs files related with that application is stored inside this logs folder. Now next we have the models folder. Models is itself is clear about in all the frameworks that it always connect with the database connections. We are going to make an application, and in that application we have made our queries with the database, we have fetched some record, we have inserted some records, we have deleted some records, we have updated some records. All the queries related with the database all goes inside this models file. Now next we have third party. Suppose we are going to integrate about the Facebook login, Gmail login, PayPal, Stripe and many more the Google APIs. If you want to use those third-party APIs, then those folders will go inside this third-party folder, and we will make the linking of these third-party APIs over the controllers and the views files accordingly. And the next and the final folder we have called views folder. This is the presentational layer. This is those presentation layer actually the users can view. So all these views files go inside this views folder. So in our upcoming videos guys, we will basically focus on the folders called config, about controllers, about helpers, about libraries, models and the views folder. These are basically the core folders in which we are going to control and make an application after completing this, the basic of CodeIgniter series. So as we have discussed about the folder structure of CodeIgniter, so how can we actually design application that how can it flows by using the CodeIgniter framework. So I have an image. If we open that image, then as we can see that the index.php file, this is the index.php file which basically at the root folder of the learn CI folder, and as we can see that it is here. So this is index.php. How can it connect this file about the MVC pattern of the CodeIgniter? Back to image. After finding this file inside our application, it goes inside the routing, where basically routing is stored. As we have discussed in our folder structure application, inside config, we have a file called routes.php. This file is basically used for the routing purpose. So index.php finds this file inside our config folder. After finding that, if suppose we have enabled the feature of CSRF token inside the application or any of the security, that it will check firstly. And also before security, what we have discussed for the caching, if suppose we have some repeated contents over all the pages, so firstly that caching actually contains load first, so it goes inside here. And finally it checks about the security. After checking those things, it goes to our application controller, and as we have discussed that all the controllers is stored inside this controllers folder. Back to image. After finding appropriate controller, and all the controller basically connects with the models, libraries, helpers, plugins and the scripts. Plugins is the third party folder. So all the controllers basically have all the features associated with all these folders. And finally, collecting all the features from helpers, from the libraries, from the third party, from the models, it presents all the data inside our views folder. Means it is going to present all the data to our presentation layer, and this data basically if contains some repeated contents, that it will pick all the contents from this caching technique and load all the data to our user view. So finally guys, this is the application flow, and this is all about the folder structure. So I think guys that I have given you the idea about the folder structure and the application flow of CodeIgniter. In our upcoming videos, we will go and learn about these folders called what we have discussed about the controllers, about views and about the models. So inside this video session guys, if you have any doubt, then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day.